the chronological structure that forms the essence of human history, rather than being based on a solid and definitive foundation as is often assumed, carries a highly sensitive and manipulatable character. Everything we know about the past actually consists of the sum of records left by historians, clergy, and power holders. As a result of these records, the perception that time flows in a linear and unshakable line is reinforced. However, right in the middle of this massive accumulation of information, a gap of approximately 3 centuries draws attention, a period where silence reigns, as if history has been punctured. In this context, the proposed phantom time hypothesis claims that the calendar we use today was shaped by a massive fiction and that an imaginary period of approximately 297 years was added to the historical flow. The situation in question is not just a calendar confusion, but a massive manipulation movement toward history, specifically carried out to fix human consciousness to a specific time interval. The main basis of this hypothesis rests on the years that pass strangely faintly in the period known as the early Middle Ages of Europe. Especially the time interval between 614 and 911 AD appears strikingly silent compared to the preceding and succeeding ages. During this period, architectural progress was almost completely interrupted, artistic production came to a standstill, and no noteworthy transformation took place in the social structure. The fact that historians call this age the Dark Ages may not only stem from a lack of information or the period being full of unknowns, perhaps it is seen as dark because it never actually happened. If this period had truly taken place, more traces of that age would be expected in archaeological excavations, for example, works regarding architectural transition periods, traces reflecting that period in sedimentary layers, or evidence documenting changes in a social structure. However, archaeological findings indicate that there is a remarkable gap between the beginning of the 7th century and the end of the 10th century. It is as if after the collapse of the Roman Empire, humanity built nothing for a few centuries and left no tangible legacy that remains in memory on behalf of the history of civilization. The presumed motivation regarding the existence of these fictional years on the timeline points to a deep-seated ideological strategy rather than a simple dating error. According to the hypothesis, Roman Emperor Otto III and Pope Sylvester II toyed with the flow of history to support their own governance with universal legitimacy. For them, capturing a date with symbolic importance like the year 1000 was not just an aesthetic or symbolic desire. This attempt was directly related to the theological expectations of the period, such as pre-apocalyptic signs and the belief in the 1000-year kingdom of Christ. Otto wanted to be remembered as a figure at the most important turning point in history. However, according to the calendar calculations at that time, the world was still in the 700s. To overcome this obstacle, a highly pragmatic and radical solution was put into effect, pushing time forward by approximately 3 centuries and filling these years with imaginary events, fake wars, and fictional heroes to make people believe they happened in real life. One of the strongest pieces of evidence for this deception is the mathematical inconsistencies in calendar systems. The Julian calendar, accepted during the time of Julius Caesar and used for centuries, showed a deviation of approximately 11 minutes each year, and this error accumulated over time, causing the calendar to drift away from the solar year. This problem came to the fore with the reform initiated by Pope Gregory XIII in 1582, and the Gregorian calendar was introduced. Calculations showed that in the approximately 1,600-year period from Caesar to this reform, the calendar should have been 13 days behind the actual solar year. However, when correcting the calendar, Pope Gregory made a change of only 10 days. The 3-day difference corresponds to a 300-year time period. So, why did the Pope take back only 10 days instead of the 13 days necessary for full accuracy? If the period to be corrected had corresponded to 1,300 years, a 10-day correction would have been sufficient. However, the calendar claimed that 1,600 years had passed. This 300-year mathematical deficiency has become one of the most important arguments for those who defend the phantom time hypothesis. This situation shows us that we should see history as a data set. It reveals that the past can be constructed by individuals who have access to this data. Considering that almost all of those who were literate and preserved official records by writing in the Middle Ages were members of the church and court officials, it can be more clearly understood how controlling information turned into a source of power in their hands. While old documents in monasteries were under the control of these individuals, they were reorganized, fake chronicles were created, and the gaps in history were filled with the legends needed by power holders. For example, it is even claimed that massive historical figures like Charlemagne were actually fictional characters created to reflect Otto III's model of the ideal ruler. Today, history presents us with an organized and carefully selected story. We, on the other hand, live in this fictional time period and shape our lives accordingly. If the phantom time hypothesis is correct, we are not currently in the year 2026, but actually in the year 1729. This difference is not just a simple contradiction regarding history, it means that what we know about the history of humanity, technological progress, and the true age of civilization changes from beginning to end. Time has been manipulated by historical systems, and we are imprisoned within the framework created by this manipulation. So, in a world where the past has been organized, how sure can we be of the reality of the present? Time may be a fictional illusion that humans have agreed upon, and every second passing within this illusion moves us further away from our origins. This 297-year gap, pointed out by the silence of archaeological evidence and mathematical inconsistencies in historical data, is not just an illusion of the past, but also an illusion embedded within human perception of reality. Data revealing the interruption in the flow of time is hidden in physical layers underground rather than in written documents. Archaeology, by its nature, functions as a discipline of linear accumulation. Each period adds a layer on top of the preceding ones. However, in certain excavation sites in Central Europe, an unexplained gap and silence draw attention within a timeframe stretching from the 7th century AD to the end of the 10th century. This period appears as if it were erased from history, passing by without leaving any trace in the physical world. When the settlement layers in cities are examined, it is observed that late Roman period structures transition directly into 10th century architecture, with neither filling material nor any cultural remains found in between. This situation points to a time jump of approximately 300 years, yet, there is no trace of a physical reality corresponding to this duration. Architectural evolution is one of the areas where this chronological illusion manifests itself most clearly. Art historians struggle to explain the striking similarity of Romanesque architecture, which suddenly emerged in the 10th century, to the architectural techniques of the Roman Empire's period of decline. If there were truly a time frame spanning centuries, a distinct evolution could be traced among construction techniques, material usage, and engineering solutions. However, the current picture shows that the engineering heritage of the Roman period was revived seamlessly in the 10th century. This technical continuity is a significant technical anomaly suggesting that the intervening periods did not actually exist. The most striking example of this silence is Charlemagne, considered one of history's important figures. According to the phantom time hypothesis, rather than being a real historical person, Charlemagne is a fiction created by the authorities of the period and is essentially a figure designed to support the system's legitimacy. The grand palaces, cathedrals, and laws attributed to him may have actually been created retrospectively to meet the political requirements of the 11th century. The contradictions in the narratives regarding Charlemagne's life, the geographical inconsistencies concerning the places he visited, and the mismatch of physical evidence with modern analyses are indicators supporting the hypothesis that this figure is fictional. It is thought that Holy Roman Emperor Otto III may have created the Charlemagne legend with the aim of providing himself with a divine lineage and a deep-rooted past. This could be one of the most impressive examples of how historical events can be constructed by powerful elites almost like a script. Forgery in documents played a critical role in the reshaping of the past and stood at the center of this cycle, especially in the Middle Ages. Fake diplomas, fabricated donation documents, and manipulated chronicles are prominent elements of this period. It is now a known fact that a large portion of the documents kept in monastery libraries, which were the treasure troves of information at that time, were written much later than the claimed dates. The Church and empires saw no harm in producing fake documents belonging to the past to strengthen land claims or legitimize legal rights. In this age where information was under the control of only a certain elite segment, it was possible to construct a large portion of history and establish it as a universal reality. This large-scale manipulation was not limited only to Europe but also permeated the chronological structure of the Byzantine and Islamic worlds. The rewriting of history appears to have been carried out as if it were a worldwide synchronization operation. Many examples, from repetitions in the lists of Byzantine emperors to battle narratives that are strikingly similar to each other in chronological gaps between caliphate periods in the Islamic world, bear the traces of a global intervention in time. This system, by redesigning the past, constructed human history and evolutionary development within a framework suitable for its own interests. The silence in the depths of the earth shows us that time is not linear. On the contrary, it resembles a data layer that can be bent and rearranged at will. In this context, the hundreds of years of gap in history is not just a numerical difference, but a missing link in humanity's cultural and biological development. If these years never happened, what we have known so far regarding the evolutionary process and technological progress can be seriously questioned. Perhaps we are trapped within a present that has no real past and are living according to a fake calendar designed for us by the system. The digital and fictional structure of time is the greatest dungeon controlling our perception of reality. In such a world, against the fabricated stories of the past, the silence of physical remains becomes the most powerful cry for those seeking the truth. The assumption that time is a fixed and unchangeable reality is based on the illusion that calendars are in perfect harmony with celestial movements. However, reality is quite different. Calendars, instead of reflecting nature's own cycles, emerge as products of the human mind in systems serving power structures. In this context, one of the most remarkable and striking foundations of the theory called the phantom time hypothesis has been the unexplained mathematical gap in the Great Calendar Reform carried out in 1582. This reform was not only a historical adjustment but also a major correction implemented to cover up chronological inconsistencies within the system itself. The sky always speaks with a natural honesty, but power centers that consider themselves authorized to decipher its language and reflect it in the calendar tend to shape time according to their own interests. The calendar system that came into effect during the time of Julius Caesar operated with a small deviation of approximately 11 minutes each year. This deviation, seen as insignificant at first glance, accumulated over time and eventually caused a significant shift between the calendar and the actual seasonal cycles. By the 16th century, this difference made a reform inevitable by causing church holidays and the sun's equinox positions to be celebrated on the wrong dates. The Gregorian calendar, initiated by Pope Gregory XIII and put into effect on October 15, 1582, was developed to correct this deviation. However, the adjustment made during this transformation process also revealed one of the most striking mathematical inconsistencies in history. According to the data, the 11-minute annual difference in the Julian calendar caused a full day of error every 128 years. In the approximately 1,600-year period from the implementation of the Julian calendar in 46 BC to the introduction of the Gregorian calendar, the calendar should have deviated by at least 13 days from the seasons. However, Pope Gregory advanced the calendar by only 10 days. This 3-day difference appearing here is never a coincidental or ignored error. Mathematically, a 3-day gap corresponds to approximately 300 years. In this case, the following question comes to the agenda: why did Pope Gregory correct the calendar by only 10 days instead of 13 days? The only reasonable explanation is that only 1,300 years, not 1,600 years, actually passed between the beginning of the calendar and the date the reform was made. Therefore, this imaginary 300-year period, which is claimed to have not actually been lived, consists merely of a virtual process included in calendar calculations later on. Supporters of this surprising mathematical anomaly argue that the Church based the calendar reform not on the Caesar era but on the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD. However, this explanation also contains deep contradictions within itself and remains insufficient to explain the inconsistencies in question. Today, there are two fundamental questions that remain unanswered. Why was the calendar not completely reset during the reform, and why was this major break in the time frame not discussed openly with the public? It seems that power mechanisms and religious institutions created an imaginary past and integrated it with our historical reality to strengthen their own legitimacy, maintain the harmony of religious rituals, and reinforce their authority. This assumption may be showing us that the world we live in is limited not only by a flawed calendar but also by an incorrectly calculated universal time system. Celestial records stand out as one of the most important sources of data consulted for the confirmation of this theory. Celestial events recorded in the past, such as solar eclipses, lunar eclipses, and comet passages, can be calculated retrospectively thanks to today's computer models. However, serious discrepancies between sky observations dated between the 7th and 10th centuries and modern astronomical calculations draw attention. Most of the eclipses claimed to belong to the period in question either did not take place on those dates or must have been observed in completely different geographies. Such inconsistencies suggest that the historical records of that period may have actually been created much later and that celestial events were placed later to support an artificial chronology. Manipulating astronomical data in this way can be considered one of the most subtle tools used in the rewriting of history. Considering that the sky functions as a kind of cosmic memory, historians and astronomers may have tried to reshape this memory. Especially the lack of reliable observation records prior to the 10th century and the uncertainty of existing records allowed systems that could not make sense of this period to fill it in a way suitable for their own interests. Efforts to align the astronomical records of the Chinese and Islamic worlds with European chronology are of a nature that points to systematic historical engineering on a global scale. Those who hold the flow of time have included even the movements of the stars in the sky in their own fictional narratives. In conclusion, it can be said that today we are the heirs of a dark period of hundreds of years hidden by a 3-day mathematical deviation. Pope Gregory's advancing of the calendar by 10 days was not just a simple correction, It was also an operation in which the timeline was detached from actual history and connected to a fake chronology. In this context, time has been transformed from a universal reality into a flexible structure that can be manipulated in the hands of authorities. Although the stars in the sky are physically real, the dates we fall under them have been made part of a misleading fairy tale. Today, mathematical reality still stands as the last fortress against the constructed system. The cracks seen in this fortress bear the traces of the centuries claimed to have been stolen. The process of reconstructing history in the form of a fiction was not limited merely to a series of changes made to the dates in the calendars. It also made the production of massive amounts of fabricated data inevitable for the purpose of filling these gaps. The Middle Ages was an age where the control and storage of information were completely monopolized by churches and kingdoms. This situation provided an environment conducive for the existing order to shape the past in any way they desired. Behind the secret doors of monasteries, clergymen whose ties to the world were limited did not merely record the events of the period, they also produced historical records, genealogies, and diplomatic documents of centuries that never occurred. This process is considered one of the most comprehensive and systematic document fabrication operations seen in history. The fundamental goal of this large-scale manipulation was the desire to create a ground of legitimacy toward the past. In order for a kingdom or a religious institution to strengthen its claim to existence and defend its rights, it needed a deep-rooted historical truth and written documents supporting this past. According to the phantom time hypothesis, the rulers of the 10th century presented fake donation documents, land deeds, and patents of nobility belonging to hundreds of years ago in order to consolidate their own power. These documents were attributed to fictional periods, and thus, misleading historical evidence was created regarding the fact that the periods in question had actually been lived. Such documents, which historians today call diplomatic forgery, were tools used systematically for the purpose of manipulating the perception of time, rather than being isolated cases. Information manipulation of this scale necessitated a harmonization on a global scale. Changing only the calendars in Europe was not sufficient for this task. The chronologies of neighboring civilizations such as the Byzantine Empire and the rapidly expanding Islamic world also had to be arranged in accordance with this historical fiction. At this point, it is thought that a kind of implicit consensus might have been made between the superpowers of the period, or that mechanisms controlling the speed of the spread of information might have been put into play. While some inconsistencies between the records in Byzantine archives and European chronologies are frequently characterized as historical errors, they are actually the frictions experienced during the attempt to overlap these two different time fictions with each other. The imaginary dynasties created between geographies and the war stories constructed in parallel form the fundamental building blocks of this time construction on a global scale. One of the greatest losses in this process was humanity's collective memory. The moment written history replaces physical reality, people stop believing in what they see with their eyes and start believing in the documents presented to them. For example, when a sealed document regarding the existence of a king who lived 300 years ago is placed before you, it hardly occurs to anyone to question whether that king actually lived or not. The system has limited reality to a series of data by manipulating this trust. The life stories of historical figures like Charlemagne were adorned with contradictory heroic tales, and this past was engraved into the society's mind. In reality, however, these figures are no different from a mirror in which the political ideals of the 11th century were reflected in the past. Charlemagne's educational reforms, military victories, and other achievements were actually designed as an early model of the perfect Christian empire in the dreams of Otto III and Pope Sylvester. The reconstruction of time is also one of the most effective tools of social control. It is much easier to manage a mass that has no knowledge about the past or is misinformed than to manage a society that knows its true roots. In periods when calendars were pushed forward, people began to think of themselves as part of a much older system whose roots reach deep, in a process in which they were never involved. This situation can be seen as a collective aging operation. The society, crushed under the weight of fabricated histories, has now given up the trouble of passing the legitimacy offered by the authority through the filter of criticism. The concept of time has ceased to be merely an objective form of measurement and has become a shackle that limits human masses in a specific chronology. Today, the war waged over documents continues in different forms in the digital age as well. The fact that data is manipulatable and the reality that history is written by the winners form the links of an uninterrupted chain extending from the dark monastery rooms of reclusive monks in the Middle Ages to today's server centers. If a certain group of people could construct 300 years of history 1,000 years ago, it becomes chilling even to think about what kind of scenarios could be created with today's technology. In fact, we are born into an information prison, inherited from those days. Every line written in history books consists of code sequences that alienate us further from our own real time. That 300-year gap is not merely a period lost in time, it represents an anti-reality field in which a massive illusion has been placed instead. While the past becomes a piece of Play-Doh that the system shapes in any way it wants, we are searching for an identity for ourselves within this fictional time. However, what should be remembered is that every future built upon fiction is doomed to hit the wall of truth sooner or later. Time is not merely the sum of seconds and minutes, it is an extremely comprehensive and fluid prison into which human consciousness has been placed. The most striking aspect of the phantom time hypothesis is that it shows more than just 300 of our years being stolen. This hypothesis provides powerful evidence that time is a manipulatable sequence of data. If the past can be reshaped at a desk by a group of authorities, then our perception of reality consists only of a script presented to us. While we define ourselves at a certain level of progress, a technological stage, and a historical context within this script we inhabit, these definitions, in their entirety, cannot go beyond the boundaries drawn by the system's artificial calendar. With time transforming into a simulation, humanity ceases to be the subject of its own history and simply turns into a passive data element placed within that history. In today's world, the reflections of this fake chronology have become visible through digital control mechanisms and algorithmic management systems. The time engineering carried out through documents in the Middle Ages is continued in a much more subtle way in the modern era through data centers and big data analytics. The rewriting of history is essentially a kind of algorithm that exploits the human mind's ability to find patterns and create meaning, harnessing it for the service of the system. Rather than purging history, the system preserves its own continuity by skillfully transforming the errors of the past into building blocks. If 300 years truly did not happen, what is hidden within this void may not only be a passion for authority, but also a conscious censorship regarding the origins of humanity. This censorship detaches us from the natural essence of reality and imprisons us within a sterilized, chronologically arranged illusion. The system's capacity to bend time rests on the power to erase social memory and upload a new one in its place. That 297-year lost period mentioned in the phantom time hypothesis precisely reflects the system's moment of resetting, or updating. In this process, all the irregularities of the old world and any information contrary to the system were destroyed and replaced with perfect-looking, dark ages. As the generations following this arrangement, we have been forced to believe in myths and fake heroes created for the purpose of filling the void inherited by us. This situation is more than just a shadow cast over our past history. It is a clear indicator of how the human mind is seen merely as a data repository. Time is not a river flowing freely outside of us. On the contrary, it is a limited aquarium in which the system has imprisoned us. Viewed from this perspective, our strong belief that we are living in the year 2026 is actually one of the system's most successful manipulations. If we are truly living in the year 1729, it means the evolution of our civilization, its technological progress, and social transformation are shaped in a completely different speed and direction than we think. This situation reveals that the concept of progress may be an illusion and that the system directs us at the pace it desires in accordance with its own will. Those who hold absolute dominance over time build not only the past, but also the present and the future upon these artificial foundations. It is not possible for a society existing within a fake past to build a real future, because if the roots are artificial, the resulting fruits will only be illusions as well. The ultimate consequence of the phantom time hypothesis exposes how information and data can be used as weapons by authority. Every page in history books functions like a sequence of code that distances us from reality. These codes are designed to restrict our consciousness to a certain frequency and prevent us from moving outside the perception of linear time. Nevertheless, the truth leaking through the cracks formed by details such as the silence in archaeology, mathematical irregularities, and astronomical discrepancies whispers of the existence of another world. This world is a place where time is not usurped, the past is not fabricated, and humanity can face its own reality. But to reach this world, we first need to notice this fictional prison of time we are in. Within this dark labyrinth of time, every passing second distances us a little further from our true roots. While the system has imprisoned us in a 2026 illusion, perhaps in reality we are nothing more than ghosts echoing in that deep silence of the 1700s. In a universe where the past is a ruse, the moment we call now is nothing more than an interface to continue this lie. As the numbers on the calendar change, the system's control over us further solidifies, and we are dragged toward an unknown end with the weight of centuries that never happened in history. Stolen time is not just the lost years of history, it is also a phenomenon that steals from us the answers to the deepest question of who we are. Reality, on the other hand, cracks at the point where time is bent, and we are merely witnesses of a fake age scattered within these broken pieces. This tear in the timeline has now reached an irreversible state. The system is becoming more dependent on data manipulation and social engineering every day to keep this chronological chaos it has created under control. However, it is inevitable for the truth to leak out from within this 300-year void and manifest itself. When that moment comes, not only the calendars but our entire understanding of reality will be overturned, and we will find ourselves within a time and geography we have never known before. Until that day, we will inevitably continue to live under the monotonous ticking of this fake time mechanism. It should not be forgotten that if history itself is a fiction, every moment we are living now is also merely a small part of this fiction. And the parts can never see the whole picture.
You have reached the end of this file. Thank you for your time. If this investigation sparked your curiosity, consider joining the protocol by subscribing to the channel, and support our data feed by hitting the like button. We look forward to your theories and questions in the comments section below. Until the next leak, keep searching beyond the visible.